Welcome to the Going Green podcast, and today we're going to have a look at heat. Yeah, basically, last year was a record-breaking year. Is this going to be a record-breaking year? And what we want to concentrate is having a look at how does this affect the public health, or more precisely, the public death.
Dun dun dun.
So, public health, something we all know about because we're the public and we have our health, and we're looking at people dying from heat exhaustion.
Well, it's one of those odd things where to classify it is they are looking at sort of heat related causes of death. So they're looking at things like heat stroke. I can't remember what the other things are. It's,
Quite a lot. Move your mic.
Yeah.
If you're going to face me. What is basically going on here is that it isn't just heat stroke. It's not just heat that's causing problems, but as the climate changes, perhaps as what's happening in South Europe, basically mosquitoes are moving in. Now we've got dengue fever that we didn't have. Now we've got the Anopheles mosquito causing malaria, and now we've got deaths from malaria that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the climate change. So these are now going to be classed as heat-related deaths.
Yeah, because it's not as in like things of like a warm climate or even a heat like a heat wave causing things, but it is sort of climate heat, as in the increase in average temperature is leading to these related things. So they're actually classifying it a way different, classifying things and saying, that's how they're modifying, saying these are heat related deaths. Because of course, if the climate wasn't hotter, they wouldn't have arrived or come here. So therefore, heat is temperature is more the factor that they're actually saying is related to the cause of death than anything else. And it's one of those things where they're saying sort of 9.4 of extra deaths a year. Now you might think 9.4, that's nearly 10%. You think extra, so that's take the death rate, who knows, 1,000, you add an extra 10%, suddenly that's 1,100 deaths. And I know it's
and we're actually looking at a lot bigger number than that.
Exactly. Well, I'm just saying globally is the 10%, but if you just look up places like here, they say that something daft like 54% more women are going to die from heat related causes. Unfortunately, by men have got other different death causes to be worried about, but they're just reporting that. And it's one of those staggering things that are saying, and it is all these things from catching malaria, is these other, heat related cause or causal via heat stuff.
We got some interesting ones that, you see, this country, Britain, where we live, we're not designed for heat. We have houses that are relatively well insulated. That is actually open to discussion, really. But we basically got houses that are designed for a cooler climate. And when we get something like a heat wave here, well, when I've been to Europe, what you do is you open the windows and you close the shutters. Here it's shutters?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember having these shutters here in the UK because we just don't have any.
We can turn the aircon on. Oh, sorry.
We don't have any aircon in this country because it's one of those things where it's not worth it in the long term, but perhaps, maybe, it could be.
Our aircon is opening the windows, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I have in my car. I have aircon. And I asked the kids when we're out, should I put the aircon on? They go, yes. So I wind down the window.
And then we cry because then we're being baffled by wind. That's how it works. But it is one of these things where you hear all about all these ways of sort of being not causing death, but sort of all these rising temperatures, and say, "Oh, let's turn the aircon on. We aren't adapting to it." And they were saying by the year 2050, an extra 100,000 deaths could be happening per year. And I'm not saying that that's bad, because it's sort of,
Well, it
but
is bad.
it is bad because we don't want people to be dying off for unrelated reasons. If they're dying from old age, that's good. You see, it's happy. But them dying early because, of course, of climate change. Now that's sad and disappointing, and that's what the UK health agency, a health security agency. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, there's this the health group. They've been talking about.
British Medical Journal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it's the same people. They recently made a report saying about this 10,000 extra deaths if, of course, if the average temperature is increased by, I think they were said
1.5.
1.5. They didn't do a 2 degree scenario. They only did 1.5.
And as we've talked in other episodes, 1.5 is due to arrive very probably this year.
And it's not as sad and sort of saying, but these deaths are avoidable. We're looking at, they could be avoidable if, I say, someone was to do something about it. And the answer is, this is where adapting to the climate and sort of trying to do things like sort of placing aircon into, say, not elderly care, but in care homes, those sort of places, is a good idea. Problem is, to see who's not, is it worth it, but who's going to pay for it? And this is where they wanted some funds. The whole COP thing was trying to generate some money to do so this climate adaptation, and unfortunately, we the UK are giving money away instead of spending it on ourselves, and which is, I'm not saying wrong or bad, because of course, money needs to be spent on other places. So, as in a global effort, it needs to be done. But we also need to sadly think of ourselves here in the UK, let alone elsewhere, because we're all facing the risk. As I said, if the simple answer, which is to all of this, which is the worst part, is if, of course, we reduce our emissions or even halve them, not saying, then we could avoid sort of, or extend the time of which we need to put all these funds in. And it's sort of one of those daft things where, not much effort there might actually starve off trying to put all this stuff in, which is what all these reports are trying to say, that it's bad for our health to do all this stuff.
Governments seem to accept that they're going to have to solve problems. They're not prepared to put money in to prevent a problem, but they know then they have to spend money on sorting a problem out. The UK Health Security Agency gave this country, its first ever level 4 heat warning in July 2022. And the likelihood that we're going to get another one this year, well, it's on the cards. We didn't get quite as hot last year, but, we're looking to get there probably this year. July 2022, we got 40 degrees Celsius in this country, and we got it not just in one place. We got it sort of loads of places, and it was not just the hottest year, it's the hottest year by quite a bit, which is what makes us think that we're actually going to sort of need to make plans, and we need to make plans now rather than, well, when it's coming.
And one of the, looking at the reports, hilariously, part of their plan, or at least the solution to the temporary solution of this, was, let's build more parks, or more precisely, let's build more shaded areas of parks, and which is what the government's technically committed to anyway. And it was seen as doing, if you did this, then of course that leads to basically more, not more shade, but sort of trees do wonders in trying to not reduce the temperature. That's the wrong way to put it. But to sort
They
of
do, yeah.
and and basically that's what the report was saying. If you plant more green areas or more parks and things with more trees to produce more shelter, they've got the added bonus of reducing emissions by, of course, photosynthesis. But they've also got the this moisture barrier that actually help cool people down and things, and that's all these
Yeah.
lovely things.
We can tell a very anecdotal story of that one, in that we went on holiday quite a few years ago, actually. We're down in the south of France. And down in the south of France, we're on a canal. Now, the French canals are wonderful. What they have is they have plane trees every few meters on both sides, and it's beautifully shaded. And there's the water, it evaporates, the trees there are putting water, it's cooling effect, and it was really pleasant. And then we got off the boat and we went perhaps into a little village to sort of get some bread or
Groceries or whatever.
something. And suddenly it was a lot hotter.
It was a wave of heat, essentially. You just walked in, because it's sort of, as I say, trees have an area of influence. So sort of as soon as you're outside. But whilst we were on holiday, of course, France at the time was recording record-breaking heat wave and lots of heat stroke deaths and all sorts of things caused by heat. And yet the canal we were on, it was actually lovely and cool and not sort of that bad, because, of course, not that it was shaded, but because the extra bonus of having trees and a relatively large body of water, it had a large cooling effect. So we were actually quite pleasant. And so you almost want to say that's the template of where we need to be going. And unfortunately, you look at a city or even a town, and then you go, but this is not how we build towns and cities and things. We're not like Venice.
Yeah. When I moved to the town where I live in, which is Hemel Hempstead in England, we walked down the high street, and it had at the top end loads of trees. We will admit then the great storm hit us, and a lot of those trees came down. If you walk down the high street now, there's not a tree in sight. It's, a concrete jungle. Not that we need to go there. There's not many shops or anything like that.
Well, yeah.
But it's not a place that you want to go to. You've got large asphalt roads, you've got concrete buildings, they build up the heat, they radiate it out. Now, perhaps in sort of springtime, that actually makes it a little bit more pleasant. But in the summer, when it's hot, it makes it really unpleasant.
Yeah,
And the people move to the parks, don't they?
they do. They were talking about inside, of course, this health report, which is where we're all getting all the information from, is that they were saying that urban areas, so much like our little concrete jungle, are actually 8 degrees warmer than the surrounding areas outside the concrete jungle. And they said if there was a park, then it was actually the park was actually significantly cooler than actually the concrete jungle it was next to. So you had 8 degrees, and sort of maybe it was the park was then cooler by 4. So actually the difference between being in the concrete jungle to the park was actually 12 degrees in temperature, and obviously downwards. And when you're at 40, suddenly, even 40, 45, that sort of trend of going is actually turns nice and sort of not a decent temperature, but a livable temperature rather than built into all this heat. But the crisis we come across is that we are building concrete jungles without thinking about green sort of areas of nice green habitation. But of course, you've got to understand there's a problem of wanting to go where you're going to put people, where you're going to put the buildings, and sort of daftly, where do you want to put the roads? Because that's the problem. It is all the roads. and I'm not saying make places more walkable and livable and get rid of roads and put pavements down, because of course pavements are still concrete, asphalt, or that sort of material. So you're not helping that in regards. You basically need not wide boulevards, but you actually need to move the buildings away from each other, so you can not necessarily put a line of trees down the middle of the street.
But it's not a bad
But
idea.
that's not, it's not a bad idea at all. But that will actually lead to more space in the less buildup of heat, because it basically bounces away, rather than actually concentrate. It's just one of those things where they said there was lots of, the angles of trapping heat. If something, forms and basically bounces back in across, it traps it. Whereas if you add the space, and this is the important thing, they're not necessarily talking about, you don't actually need to plant trees or anything at the moment, but just space between buildings, having that not.
But putting trees in will also give us a large carbon sink. It'll get rid of a lot more carbon dioxide, which is part of the thing that's causing the problem at the moment. So we can. The UK where we live, it's not designed for heat. We didn't design our towns, our villages for heat. You go to Europe, the houses are designed differently. They have sort of, well, the typical terracotta roofs, don't they? Rather than the sort of grey ones that we have here. Although my grey roof is largely hidden by solar panels. But most of the roofs are grey. They absorb the heat and they make places sort of gradually worse. We're needing to change things. Either we need to retrofit a lot of the houses in this country, or we need to basically design new and better towns, cities, thinking more green rather than anything else. I came from a town, Southampton, and that had a very green park policy. And wherever I lived in Southampton, I lived in a few parts, it wasn't too far to go to the nearest park. I now live in lovely Hemel Hempstead. I use lovely in probably inverted commas here. And I do live next to a park. It's only a few hundred yards away that I can walk to two parks.
But
The same cannot be said for most places in Hemel Hempstead.
well, no, unfortunately not. And this is where we need to think about what we're doing. More, not necessarily more thought, but actually to look at where we're going and actually plan for, unfortunately, the future heat, as in an increase in heat, and potentially come up with ways to mitigate that. Because since we're going from a very hot to a very cold climate, if that makes with basically the winters are getting warmer, but they also can be quite cold still, right up to quite balmy heat wave sort of temperature,
Like we're having now.
like we're going through, not necessarily, and we're looking at sort of where the places that go through not this rapid change in heat, but the sort of cold winters followed by really hot summers. And the answer is we actually need to look more to places like Africa, because they do not. I'm not saying on the equator, because it's not. I'm talking northern Africa, where basically they live in deserts. Now deserts are really hot during the day, of course, but then during the
Night they're really cold, yeah.
nights they're really cold, and so you got to look how they've adapted to doing this. And it's one of those things where, of course, they use lovely things like paint, and it's boring things like white paint. Obviously, that reflects a lot of things away, instead of building with dark materials to actually lock in and absorb that heat. You see, it's just using clever things like that. And they talk very much about ventilation in regards to actually not helping the passage of air move, but sort of, if you can sort of find a way to get air to move around places, that's then actually makes the heat more bearable, because you're able to actually I say sweat and perspirate, but you're actually able to, your body is able to get heat away. And so, getting trapped that way. So it is this future heat that we need to look at to determine where is and how best to actually transform, not our lives necessarily, but sort of the global community in regards to knowing we've got this increased heat.
Well, we're sitting here in midwinter in the sort of northern hemisphere, and it's not really as cold. I've seen other years looking back over photographs of snow on the sort of roads, and we're in double digits here at the moment, much more mild. But if we go down to the southern continent and have a look round there, the southern part of the hemisphere, we're looking at places like Buenos Aires. They're sort of rapidly approaching 40, and they're complaining that from Reuters that everything is melting, and they just can't escape. You've got what, 45 million people in something like Brazil, and they're all suffering here from very hot temperatures. And what can they do about it? Well, it's not such a developed country, not so much resources as this country, and they've also got rid of a lot of the rainforests as well.
Which is,
So
not, that's not helping either.
it's
But
getting worse, yeah.
But one of the major things, of course, is they're not doing the intelligent thing of, which is what unfortunately, what we've done. They're making the same mistake. Is that I say they're urbanizing, but they're actually not taking into account greener space. Because unfortunately, what they're saying is, but having a green space that's not useful land and therefore not making money, or what's the point of it? Therefore, if I build a house, that generates me income, so sort of, that's why they're building more houses and more houses, and creating more and more urban jungle than actually creating sort of spacious, not outside parks, but sort of understanding better land use to
Yeah.
actually mitigate things and heat.
It's not just land, of course, it's the sea. The sea last year was 1.4 degrees warmer in the North Atlantic than the sort of 1982 to 2011 average. That's quite frightening. They're worrying about at the moment, uh, looking at all the figures, that 3 degrees is sort of, well, going to be just around the corner. And that's really frightening to think that the sea temperature is going up. We were talking about 1.2. Suddenly we're on 1.4. We're thinking about 1.5. And this is making life difficult. The sea is a huge heat sink. And although it can absorb an awful lot of heat, it does have this nasty habit of moving around and making places like perhaps the UK having warmer seawater than we've been used to. And it happened last year, and there's no evidence to show that it's not going to happen again this year and the next year. And so we've got to get prepared for this and try to sort of adapt.
Yeah, and unfortunately, one of those many things is in all sorts of this research, you've got problems of, what's the effect of, say, El Nino on this, or there's all these ideas that not they come up with, but the sort of, you got to look at sort of the research and say, right, this is directly heat affecting us, as opposed to, say, the ocean's temperature. That's actually not directly affecting us, but that is causing stronger storms and sort of more, well, not necessarily more storms, but at least stronger storms. And so that's affecting us in a different way, all because
Yeah. So
the ocean,
are people that get killed by a storm coming through and uprooting trees and killing them, are they result of heat? sounds daft to think that we're actually quite cold, but it's the change in temperature, the change of having hot and cold meeting that tends to generate these terrific storms. Paul and I have been watching these storms move in, and we're moving quite rapidly through the alphabet at the moment.
Yeah,
And they're all very low storms, aren't they? All very deep storms, strong winds.
yeah, well, just unfortunately, just how like I say, the currently how the jet stream is built, but it is that mixture between the cold and the warm that's affecting it, and that causes strong, basically storms to appear. And it's the right conditions, and effectively, we just have the right condition to cause storm upon storm upon storm upon storm across the Atlantic, like a conveyor belt. And
And that brings more rain and floods, as well as generally warmer temperatures. Although, if a really cold bit hits a really warm bit, so you've got the warm bit with typically lots of rain in it, and it meets a very cold bit, and somewhere like Norway's had very cold. Uh, when they meet, there you get snow. But I was reading another simple report which said about global warming, and it said Norway had got really cold. But if it hadn't been for global warming, it would have been perhaps 4 degrees warmer. So
yeah,
it didn't break the records. It was pretty damn cold, but it would have been even colder without global warming.
yeah, I was reading that in regards to they said it with everything getting warmer, that actually Norway is one of the places that is set to actually get colder because of all the increased warmth, which is one of the it's like the UK or everywhere is set to get warmer and hotter and drier, except we're not the quite the opposite. We're expected just to get wetter and warmer. We're just expected just to get wetter and warmer as opposed to
Yeah, that's all
drier.
this ice melting in the Arctic and Antarctic. It's getting smaller and it's moving down, and it's got to go somewhere. And the UK's right in the firing line.
Yeah, so and this is the crux of the whole thing. And of course, the major part is that, of course, climate is not constantly evolving. That's the wrong way to put it, but it's continuous. You can't say, right, you've got to always look at sort of what previously happened to then work out why things are happening now. And then you can trace back things, right? Yeah, you can trace back all sorts of, say, the storms to uh, the conditions across America and the jet stream where there was a cold plume that met the tropics. And of course, that's where the jet stream was sort of intensifying. And that's where it basically created this almost not shotgun blast, but sort of, and that just propelled and created the right conditions for the conveyor belt to build all these storms up and through. Yeah. And see, that's where, as I said, our the reason we got lots of storms wasn't because of where we are in the world. It was because, of course, over on the other side of the world, so there was a cyclone, and we heard that story of a cyclone hitting Japan,
It's
and
it's a knock-on effect,
it,
isn't it?
it caused a knock-on effects, and it's about 3 to 4 weeks we then get the effects, and of course, that's a whole month. So
Yeah.
we have to work out what's happening elsewhere a month ago to then determine what's going to happen now. So if we look at elsewhere now, we can actually predict what's happening now, except
Yeah.
occasionally we can't.
So it's a whole world effect. It's not Britain suffering. It's not Argentina suffering. It's not about wildfires here, floods there. It's everywhere. Everywhere is suffering from global climate change. We're seeing the heat build up. We're seeing how it affects people. We're seeing that more people are dying as basically the climate changes and affects not just one place, but the whole world. It's quite worrying, really. And if you're worried, well, you can join us because we're worried about it. And what we need to do is we need to try and impress upon all our politicians throughout the world that this is of global importance, but it's also of local importance, and it's about people dying. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at heat and the problems that it's posing to public health. We'll be back next time with another item about going green and climate change. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye.